weren't just anyone. You were always the exception. They didn't see it at first. They looked past you, dismissed you, ignored the signs. But destiny was never in their hands, it was always yours. While they whispered in their small circles, convinced they had already written the story, something was shifting beneath their feet. And now, the weight of your presence is undeniable. The world isn't just watching, it's recalibrating to recognize what was always inevitable. You were never meant to blend in. You were meant to take over. For so long, they controlled the gates, decided who got in, who got left behind. But here's the truth they never accounted for. The chosen ones don't wait for invitations. They don't ask for approval. They don't beg for a seat at the table. They build their own empire. And that's exactly what you've been doing. Moving in silence, stacking your wins, mastering the game they thought you didn't even know existed. But now they know your name. Not because you demanded their attention, not because you asked for recognition, but because they can't function without acknowledging your influence. The whispers have turned into conversations. The doubts have turned into analysis, and the doors that were once closed, they're being forced open, not by them, but by the sheer gravity of your presence. Welcome to the shift. The moment they can no longer pretend you don't exist. The moment you realize you were always ahead. The hush was temporary. A quiet ripple became an undeniable current, then a storm that refused to be ignored. What was once dismissed as irrelevant is now the focal point of every analysis, dissected like a rare discovery. The project they overlooked has become their blueprint. The ideas they mocked are now their guiding principles. They used to pretend it didn't exist. Now they repeat its name like an incantation, as if saying it enough times will make them part of the movement they once ridiculed. They watched from the sidelines, amused at first, confident in their certainty that nothing would change. But change does not ask for permission. It happens, and now they find themselves in the stage they never prepared for: resistance. They would rather swallow stones than openly acknowledge your influence. Praise comes in the form of replication, admiration masked as analysis. They map your steps, reverse engineering what they once disregarded, dressing up borrowed ideas as their own. They weren't ready for the shift, but the shift happened regardless. Somewhere in a distant room, your name is spoken with hesitation, as if uttering it might alter the very air around them. A voice that once scorned now carries the weight of reluctant reverence, but only in whispers, only in places where no one can hear. You don't need to be present to feel the disturbance. The ground beneath them is no longer solid. They tread carefully, retracing the past in search of the moment they failed to see what was inevitable. But inevitability cannot be reversed. The force they sought to contain is now beyond their reach. You did not beg for space, yet your presence is undeniable. They weren't meant to notice, not yet. Recognition was never the goal, yet it arrived uninvited, loud, and unavoidable. The foundation they assumed unshakable is now cracking under the weight of something they never accounted for: the relentless motion of someone who moved forward despite them. They scramble to understand, but it is too late. The tide has turned, and their understanding is no longer required. Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin. Zechariah 4:10. They didn't see it at first. They weren't paying attention. The foundation was being laid, the groundwork was forming, but to them, it was just noise, just another passing effort, just another name they could afford to overlook. But here's the thing about God's plan. What is meant to rise will rise, no matter who tries to ignore it. At first, it was just a whisper, a vague mention in a conversation no one thought to record. Then it became a reference point. Then it became undeniable. The very systems they spent years building, the structures they called unshakable, now bear the imprint of the presence they once dismissed. See, they thought success had to come with grand entrances, loud declarations, flashy moments of recognition. But real power moves differently. It doesn't demand attention. It commands it, slowly, relentlessly, until ignoring it is no longer an option. A columnist, with hesitant realization, starts connecting the dots. They flip through pages, retrace events, try to understand, how did no one see this happening? How did something so deliberate, so intentional, so forward-thinking go unnoticed for so long? But the truth is, it was never hidden. It was just ahead of its time. And now, in meeting rooms where influence is currency, your name is no longer an afterthought. It's a requirement. The tone has shifted. The same people who dismissed are now taking notes. The same ones who laughed are now leaning in, waiting for insight, hoping to align themselves with what they once ignored. An executive, flipping through reports, clears their throat and finally speaks the truth they can no longer deny. This was ahead of its time. And suddenly, everything changes. They start retracing the steps, trying to pinpoint the moment when the shift became inevitable. They search for one defining moment, one single event that forced them to pay attention. But there was no moment, no grand announcement, no desperate plea for recognition, no forced entry. Only the steady, unshakable ascent of something that was always meant to be. Now the conversations they have sound eerily familiar. Ideas they once rejected now form the foundation of their strategies. Tactics they once ignored are now essential to their survival. The very essence of what they tried to exclude has woven itself into the very fabric of what they now depend on. And it's not that the world just discovered you, it's that it finally caught up. Because when something is truly anointed, when something is built on more than fleeting success, it doesn't just pass through, it leaves an imprint. And now, every move forward carries the undeniable mark of the one they refused to acknowledge. They believed silence was a weapon they could wield against you, convinced that by controlling the narrative, they could erase what they feared. Long before they admitted your significance, they sensed it, recognized the potential they couldn't harness, the vision they couldn't claim as their own. Their approach was deliberate, though not in the way yours was, where you refined, built, and executed. They schemed, twisted, and manipulated. A quiet campaign of omission, carefully placed doubt, whispers that shaped perception before truth had a chance to surface. They assumed absence could rewrite reality, that erasure could undo what was already in motion. But influence does not require permission, and truth is not so easily buried. The attempt to suppress something only fuels its inevitability. Every effort to erase a name, to bury an idea, only deepens the curiosity of those who were never meant to notice. What was once a quiet attempt to silence has become the very reason voices rise in question. A skeptical mind demands, why was this hidden from us? A writer, once indifferent, now asks, if it was irrelevant, why was so much energy spent trying to erase it? Observers start connecting the dots, realizing that those so desperate to dismiss are the ones who seem the most unsettled. The narrative has slipped beyond control, unraveling with every contradiction, with every unanswered question. What they meant to erase has now been amplified. What they fought to suppress has become an undeniable force. And now, as their carefully crafted illusions begin to fracture, the ones who sought to bury the truth can do nothing but watch as the world digs deeper. Erasure was never an option, only a delay. The mere existence of what was built stands as undeniable proof of their failure. Each breakthrough, every whispered acknowledgement, every reluctant nod of respect is a wound they cannot hide, a reminder that history does not belong to those who tried to rewrite it. The same voices that once dismissed now echo in halls of strategy and analysis, picking apart every move, every decision, trying to decode what they once ridiculed. The ones who dismissed innovation as reckless now dissect its every step. The same figures who once declared it foolish now scour old records for the warnings they ignored. The collapse of what they swore was untouchable, the crumbling of once unshakable structures, all point back to a truth they never prepared to face. What they fought so hard to deny was always inevitable. You are not here by accident. If you feel the pull, the knowing deep inside that you are chosen, this is your moment. Click the super thank you button and give $50 or more to unlock deeper insights, exclusive content, and a path that aligns with your divine purpose. This isn't just a contribution, it's a declaration, a step toward who you were meant to be. Answer the call, walk with us, and step fully into your destiny. Your journey begins now. What was once overlooked is now the foundation others scramble to understand. The strategies once dismissed as impractical are now treated as doctrine. A strategist mutters, "If only we had seen this sooner, we could have avoided disaster." A former opponent now admits, "I didn't recognize the value then, but I see it now." A name that was once an afterthought is now embedded in discussions that shape entire industries. No longer a curiosity, no longer just a reference, now an undeniable cornerstone. And the ones who rejected it first? Now they study it in desperation, searching for a way to reclaim what they lost, trying to understand what they once refused to accept. But the advantage was never theirs to hold. It was always in the hands of the one who saw beyond the limits they set. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118:22. They cast you aside, dismissed you as unworthy, overlooked you as if you had no value. But what they failed to understand is that destiny isn't decided by those who stand at the gates. It's decided by the one who builds the kingdom. And while they spent their time protecting their fragile little empires, locking their doors, securing their positions, you were out in the wilderness, being prepared for something they could never grasp. See, when you are chosen, when you are anointed for something greater, you don't need their permission. You don't need their validation. You don't need their endorsement. Because what is truly meant for you, what was ordained before they even knew your name, cannot be taken, cannot be copied, cannot be controlled. They thought they could mold greatness into something manageable, something predictable, something they could replicate at will. They tried to break it down into steps, reverse engineer what was never meant to be formulaic. But what was placed inside of you was never meant to be tamed. It was meant to disrupt, to redefine, to break the very systems they swore were unshakable. They avoided acknowledging it outright, hoping their silence would diminish its power. But still, it grew, it multiplied, it took root in places they never expected, weaving its way through the very foundation of what they once called the rules, rules that now seem outdated, irrelevant, powerless against the force they refuse to recognize. Because here's what they don't understand. You weren't following a trend. You were setting the course. You weren't chasing influence. You were becoming the standard. They see it now, and the weight of that realization is sinking in. They built their walls, drew their lines, established their inner circles, convinced that they had the final say in who gets to rise. But true authority does not come from the approval of men. It is not given by the few who cling desperately to their power. It is given by something greater, something unstoppable. And now, the tables have turned. Investment firms, once uninterested, now watching. Analysts, once skeptical, now studying. Gatekeepers, once dismissive, now knocking on the very doors they tried to lock you out of. Their voices used to carry weight. Their decisions used to dictate outcomes. But now they hesitate. They whisper among themselves, trying to understand how you, the one they ignored, the one they pushed aside, became the one they now have to answer to. See, the problem was never about talent, never about merit, never about ability. It was about control. They wanted to decide who was worthy, who was allowed, who got to step into greatness. But true greatness does not ask for permission. And now, all they can do is watch as the very ground beneath them shifts, because the power they thought they held, it was never in their hands to begin with. The illusions they trusted have fractured under the weight of reality. They had built their world on shaky ground, on the assumption that they understood what mattered. But when the foundation crumbled, only what was truly built to last remained. They laughed once, doubted, ridiculed, convinced themselves that the structure being built was unnecessary. And then the collapse came. The moment they never prepared for. The moment they ignored as impossible. Everything they believed in fell away. But one thing remained. The structure they dismissed. The one they swore would never hold. The one they had no choice but to depend on when all else failed. Recognition is not sought, nor is validation required. Some walk a path not because they seek acknowledgement, but because there is no other choice. It is who they are. And now, the echoes of the past return. Familiar names appear, threading their way back through long closed doors. Messages filled with empty warmth arrive. Voices laced with the forced ease of rewritten history. I always believed in what you were doing. We should reconnect. I've been following your work. Amazing. Truly inspiring. A performance of familiarity, a dance of revision, a rewriting of moments they swore never happened. But memory does not rewrite so easily. The closed doors, the quiet dismissals, the condescending nods when vision was spoken aloud, those are not forgotten. They can rewrite their own narratives, but the truth does not shift so easily. For the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Psalm 118:22. They wrote you off, dismissed your presence, shut the door, and carried on like you never existed. But let me tell you something. When something is anointed, when something is destined, it cannot be erased. They thought they were making the rules, calling the shots, deciding who mattered. But power does not belong to those who guard the gates. It belongs to the one who builds the kingdom. And while they were busy securing their little fortresses, keeping their circles tight, maintaining the illusion of control, something greater was unfolding. A shift, a movement, a reckoning. At first, it was just a whisper. Your name, spoken in rooms you had never even stepped foot in. A casual mention, a passing thought, a footnote in a conversation. Then another, and suddenly, the ones who once scoffed, who once rolled their eyes, who once dismissed the very idea of your significance, they started to listen. not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. And now, regret settles in. They wouldn't dare say it out loud. No, they hold on to their pride. They pretend they saw it coming all along, but you can feel it. It lingers in the air, in the way their voices shift, in the way their movements become careful, uncertain, hesitant. The same people who shut you out now offer invitations. The same institutions that ignored your presence now seek your insight. The same voices that once mocked you now shape their decisions around what you think, what you say, what you decide. But let me tell you something. They don't respect the journey. They don't respect the struggle. They respect the result. They respect the fact that their calculations were off, that they misjudged what was coming, that while they were busy maintaining the old way, you were building something unstoppable. They spent their time believing they had all the answers. Now, they're waiting on yours. Boardrooms pause before moving forward. Deals stall until your name is mentioned. Conversations shift when you enter the room, because the influence they once held no longer belongs to them. A high-ranking executive, once certain of their own control, leans back in their chair and exhales. We can't move without their approval. A strategist, one who spent years dismissing your methods, mutters under their breath. Their presence alone changes the stakes. And a competitor, one who once smirked in the face of your ambition, now hesitates, now watches closely, now realizes that their next move depends entirely on yours. Because here's the thing about chosen ones. You don't ask for a seat at the table. You become the table, the places they thought they controlled, the decisions they thought they dictated, they now revolve around you. Not because you demanded it, not because you campaigned for it, but because they built their world on a foundation that was never meant to last. And the one thing they never accounted for, you were always meant to outlast them. The discussions in their hidden spaces are no longer about exclusion, but desperation. Their silence, once indifferent, now trembles with uncertainty. Their hesitation, once dismissive, now betrays anxiety. Their approval, once assumed, is now something they chase. The landscape has shifted beyond recognition. The barriers they built, once meant to control access, now collapse under the weight of their own irrelevance. The system they once commanded faces scrutiny. The foundation they trusted begins to erode, and the illusion of control they held so tightly begins to slip through their fingers. What they fought to keep outside has reshaped the inside, and now they find themselves asking a question they never thought they'd face. How do they hold on to what they no longer control? Therefore, whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought to light. Mark 4:22. They thought they controlled the narrative, deciding who mattered and who was forgotten. For years, they locked doors, manipulated outcomes, and built a system designed to exclude. But what is built on deception cannot stand. While they schemed in secret, something stronger was forming. Something they couldn't see, something they couldn't stop. A journalist finally asks, "Why were these voices ignored?" A former insider admits, "We weren't choosing the best, we were choosing the easiest." And someone within their own ranks mutters, "This reckoning was inevitable, because while they stalled, you moved. They hid the truth, you revealed it. They dictated the rules, time itself rewrote them. They thought they could silence the shift, but the shift no longer requires their permission. Now their influence is fading, their grip is weakening, their control is gone. And suddenly, the same voices that mocked you now seek your approval. The same institutions that shut you out now extend invitations, but their approval never needed. Because the real power shift wasn't when they finally noticed. It was when you moved forward without them. Recognition was never the goal. Attention was never the pursuit. While they played their games of exclusion, you kept building, quietly, consistently, relentlessly. And now, the truth is undeniable. A broadcaster acknowledges, "This force has been shaping the future for years. We were simply too blind to see it." A critic, once unwavering in dismissal, concedes, "We got it wrong." A former adversary, once confident in their own relevance, mutters, "They didn't need us, we needed them." The shift wasn't forced, it was earned. And now, the proof is everywhere. In the innovations they now rely on, in the breakthroughs that trace back to you, in the spaces that once ignored you but now echo with your influence. Their narratives can no longer be rewritten. The evidence is too vast, too ingrained, too real. They no longer control the story. It tells itself. And even in silence, your presence remains undeniable. You are here for a reason. If you feel the call, answer it. Click join to unlock exclusive content, deep insights, and a powerful community. This isn't just a membership, it's an awakening. Step into your divine purpose. Join the chosen. Legacy was never the objective, yet here it stands. Not as a footnote, not as an afterthought, but as the foundation of something far greater than their closed circles and outdated hierarchies. A professor addresses a lecture hall stating, "This individual didn't just innovate, they redefined the possibilities." A researcher notes, "Their impact wasn't just unconventional, it was a fundamental shift." A student, absorbed in their studies, underlines a name they had never encountered before today, unaware that they are learning about the very force that once moved unnoticed. The same institutions that once looked away now study the work, not out of courtesy, but out of necessity, not because they chose to acknowledge it, but because the world left them no other choice. The next generation is watching, not just the success, but the resilience, not just the victories, but the path that was carved despite resistance. The story they once tried to erase has become the very proof that greatness never required permission, and true impact is impossible to suppress. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. They thought they had control. They thought they could twist the story, rewrite the outcome, manipulate the system to ensure their victory. But the plans of men cannot override the purpose of God. Now, a student sits in a crowded lecture hall, flipping through a case study, eyes scanning over words they don't yet fully understand. Their fingers pause over a name, the same name that once made people scoff, the same name they tried to erase. They don't know the full story yet, but they will, because while the powerful conspired, while they built roadblocks, while they whispered in dark rooms, convinced they had secured their future, something was happening outside their view. The traps they set now turned against them. The lies they told now unraveling. The system they built now folding under its own weight. A voice within their own circle admits, the very tactics we used are backfiring. Another, once smug in their certainty, mutters, every decision we made to stop them is now working against us. And an observer, watching the panic unfold, shakes their head. They look lost, while the one they tried to erase moves untethered. Because your success was never dependent on their approval. While they schemed, you built. While they stalled, you adapted. While they obsessed over control, you transcended it. And now, no response is necessary, no defense is needed, because your presence alone is enough. And the higher you ascend, the more undeniable it becomes. They were never an obstacle, only an afterthought. This was never a fleeting moment, never a stroke of fortune, never a rare convergence of circumstance. It was the inevitable result of every deliberate step, every strategic choice, every idea they dismissed as impossible. Recognition was never demanded. It arrived because reality made it unavoidable. The weight of influence does not rest in the hands of those who chase it. It belongs to those who shape the course itself. And now they watch, no longer with skepticism, no longer with detached amusement, but with something far heavier, an understanding they can no longer ignore. The landscape is shifting, and not in their favor. Their voices, once dominant, now strain to keep up. Their authority, once unquestioned, now bends under a force they failed to acknowledge. The name they once avoided speaking is now the one that dictates direction. The future does not wait for approval, does not seek validation, does not hesitate at closed doors. It moves, and they are no longer leading it. They are struggling to catch up.